Hi everyone, Jeff, Steph, and Whit here with our final screencast for this semester titled The Complexity of Change. As you'll see in this presentation, change itself is a complex issue that requires leadership to appropriately identify and allocate resources and to avoid obstacles. But hopefully you'll also see that change is the catalyst that essentially drives leadership in a complex system. During this presentation, we'll provide an overview of the concept of complex systems and how it relates to both leadership and change, and I'll take care of that. Stephanie will then discuss some of the resources necessary for change, and then Whit will take us through some common obstacles faced when dealing with change. And then we'll finish with some specific strategies for change in our own personal situations. Again, we'll begin by looking at the concept of complex systems and its relationship to leadership and change. So first, let's define what a complex system is. Keeping things simple and stealing some thunder from Dr. Coutts, I think it's easiest to define complex systems by comparing to complicated systems and by using Dr. Coutts's cake and watch analogy. A complicated system, much like a watch, is something in which its component parts can be isolated out and taken out and put back together. In contrast, a complex system, much like a cake, is something in which its component parts cannot be separated out. Sorry, you can't go back into the cake and get your eggs. They're gone. The world we live in is complex, or as originally defined by the US military, VUCA. VUCA is an acronym that stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which pretty much sums up what it's like to parent a teenager. This sounds like a bad thing, but it's not. It's simply a description of the way things mostly are today, and I assume the way things have always been. It's up to us to understand and appreciate this and act appropriately. Otherwise, our endeavors may bear little fruit or ultimately end in failure. During the industrial age, organizations sought more efficiency and control appropriate for manufacturing. However, in today's knowledge age, the race is on for greater adaptability, knowledge, and creativity. Organizations today must be as complex as the environment that they operate in to actually function appropriately. In the old school bureaucratic models that seek to simplify, departmentalize, set boundaries, lead from the top, etc., much like during the industrial age, they're really not effective. They're counterproductive in today's VUCA world. So in a complex system, roles and relationships are dynamic and constantly evolving. Leadership in a complex system has been defined as a dynamic process that emerges in the interactive spaces between people and ideas. As such, the emphasis on the individual as a leader is typically redirected to an interactive event in which leadership is distributed. Now, these interactive events are generally brought about by opportunities or problems that need to be solved. So, in essence, change becomes the catalyst for leadership. Change defines leadership and it helps to distinguish between leadership and leaders in a complex system. So at any given moment, one may play the role of leader or a follower depending on the demands of the situation at that time. Roles are not defined hierarchically as they tend to be in complicated systems. Rather, they are defined by the interactions in the evolving process of change. Leadership theories like situational, contextual, organic are very compatible with this idea of complex systems. So in the formal sense of title, within a complex system, the leader simply attempts to enable conditions for the adaptive dynamic processes to occur, while simultaneously combating obstacles to change. Okay, so hopefully this is making some sense. Let's look at two examples. First, from my own experience, I have seen the concept of complex leadership at play where I work. Like many small private institutions, enrollment has been an ongoing issue these past few years. Recently, our new president stepped in to help fix the problem we were facing. However, rather than imposing his will, he formed a team of faculty, staff, coaches, alumni, donors, really as many invested stakeholders as he could to address the issue. And this group met regularly. Meetings were chaired by the president, but not always led by him. He simply enabled a way for the committee to creatively pursue changes in the way our admissions department operates. In the end, changes were made, policies were revamped and created, and ultimately we saw a marginal increase in admissions for this upcoming year. Again, it wasn't huge, but we met our goal. And moreover, the changes that were made were done so in a way that were understood and well received by really everyone involved on campus. In another example, one more from the health care side of things, comes from an experience Whitney had during her grad school years. As a GA, she was supervised by a very micromanaging medical director. Essentially the complete opposite of what we saw in the last example, and really the complete opposite of what is called for in complex leadership systems. So this medical director would essentially dip his toes into every aspect of that sports medicine team that he supervised, including telling specific sports coaches how to actually run their practices and how to conduct team workouts, all of which he had no experience in. Anyways, changes were made by this director. However, they were rarely well received or successful. As Witt describes it, he essentially set their department back 25 years and crushed any autonomy members of this team once had. So needless to say, this medical director did not last very long at that institution. Okay, so hopefully this has painted a bit of a clearer picture for you as to what complex systems are and how they relate to leadership and change. Steph is now going to walk us through resources necessary for change.
Change is inevitable and a necessary part of any organization. As Jeff explained with the complexity concept, each person within the organization plays an integral part in the growth. In the examples that were discussed, we heard about two different kinds of leaders and how they impacted their workplace. We had our first leader, the president of the college, who realized that change was needed in order for their enrollment to increase. Instead of him demanding the utilization of his ideas only, he formed a team to discuss and collaborate on the best steps to get more students on campus. By using each of the team members' strengths, they were able to see a positive return with an increase in enrollment. The second leader described utilized the exact opposite technique. He tried to implement his ideas without consulting with the key players in his department. For example, the coaches, strength and conditioning, athletic training, and so on. This eventually led to disgruntled employees, dissatisfaction with work, decreased quality, and the list could go on. Ultimately, this type of leadership led to his demise at the institution. One of the biggest concerns with employees in an organization is how to introduce change when they do not feel like they have the title or the ability to be heard. This is a mentality that needs to be addressed, and people need to understand that regardless of the level you are within the organization, you still are an asset and your opinion and views still have value. In order to introduce change into your environment, there are a few steps that would be beneficial. We have identified 3 areas to consider when looking to introduce change within your organization. Those areas are to evaluate your current culture and performance, clarify your initial vision, clarify values and expected behaviors. We're going to go through each of these in the next few slides. The first step will be to evaluate your current culture and performance. In order to initiate change, you need to reflect on where you have come from and what you are wanting to get out of this change that you are looking to promote. There are 3 tasks to complete to help gain insight to the true needs. Our first one is going to be to define 1 to 3 critical performance priorities. For example, growth, profitability, customer satisfaction, etc. The second is going to be to identify 3 to 5 values or behavior strengths. And the third is going to be to identify no more than 1 to 3 values that are holding back your organization from achieving its full potential with the performance priorities you defined. So, going into further depth, any idea that is created needs to have outlined priorities. In athletic training, these performance priorities may be to provide better patient care through a more holistic approach, create an environment conducive to learning versus just moving through the motions, and implementation of patient outcomes in order to gain insight to the true needs of the patient versus what you are seeing superficially. From here, you need to identify 3 to 5 values or behavior strengths that are unique to your organization. So now that we have determined our performance priorities, so the things that we really see that need to be changed within our organization, we now need to identify 3 to 5 values and behavior strengths. So what are we doing well already? What are things that people are noticing that we are doing well? This is a lot of times hard to identify, as some of the strengths the organization have are second nature and not necessarily thought of at all times. We just sort of do them already. So with the good, we also must be able to evaluate our weaknesses as well. So along with those strengths that we just identified that we are doing well, we need to now look and dig a little bit deeper and pull out what our weaknesses are. We need to identify 1 to 3 values or behavior weaknesses that we could really probably strengthen a little bit, something that we can turn it around some. This is sometimes, once again, pretty hard to kind of take that inside look. It may be beneficial to have a survey sent out to those within the organization to get their feedback on how performance is perceived as well. Regardless of the size of the organization, gaining feedback from those within is insightful and allows for the feeling of inclusiveness within the company. By completing this step, you should have a well-rounded view of where you need to go from here. So now we've determined what our priorities are, what our strengths and weaknesses are. So now we need to be able to implement whatever change it is that we want to implement from here. So now the next step will be defining the vision. If you do not have a clear vision, then you will lose sight of what is truly important. To start, you want to start small. This will allow for better focus and better chances for success. If you try to take on too many changes at one time, you may lose the focus of your peers and not be able to successfully implement the ideas. You will build a cultural advantage by leveraging the value and behavior strengths and improving the weaknesses. Think back to the example of the president of the college and university that was trying to increase enrollment. He knew that the only way to do that was to create buy-in from the faculty and staff. He utilized the strengths of those working within the institution to create a sense of ownership by all involved to make this vision a reality. If you think about it, the faculty and staff of an institution are now acting similar to our coaches who go out recruiting. The coaches are selling the school and the athletics program to potential recruits, which increases enrollment every time they have a student athlete commit to the university. The president's vision to increase enrollment with the buy-in of faculty and staff is essentially the same. Now you have 100 plus faculty and staff that are promoting the university in the surrounding areas, which will then increase enrollment over time. The first part of this vision is the need to be able to clearly communicate how you will work together to improve the weak areas, since they are holding your organization back from supporting your purpose and stakeholders. Regardless of how hard the reality of the weakness within your organization may be to face, the reality is that this is a weakness, and the only way to make it better will be to correct it. Thinking about the second example Jeff discussed earlier was the team physician who was a micromanager. He may be the nicest person outside of the workplace, however, he is bringing down the morale, causing frustration, and decreasing productivity. Ultimately, if this is not the direction the organization needs to go, then the decision needs to be made to discuss these concerns with him, see if it changes, or it may be time to find a new direction for his position. Communication is key in any aspect of an organization and must be a top priority. If you are not communicating effectively, how do you expect for all the employees to fully grasp the vision? The final step will be to define supporting expected behaviors for the 1 to 3 weaknesses that you identified in step 1. These behaviors will be consistently exhibited in your organization if you are living your values. If you want to change to be successful, everyone needs to walk the walk versus just talking the talk, meaning do as you say. People interpret values from their own perspective, so define expected behaviors within the work environment. As an organization, you have already determined what your top 2 or 3 priorities are, so now they need to be defined. Going back to the example of the university looking to increase enrollment, a weakness that they may have identified as to why students were not choosing this institution may have been something as small as lack of student support services or campus recreation. If this was a weakness identified, then a team needs to be created to determine how to rectify the issue. Another way to clarify values and expected behaviors would be to post them on all websites, policy procedure manuals, and around the company. This will allow for easy access so everyone has equal opportunity to see them or review if clarification is necessary. This all goes back to communication within the organization. If you are not clear, then the chances are likely the vision will not be as successful as it could have been. Now that you have a better understanding of how to introduce change into your workplace, you need to know some of the obstacles that may lie ahead. Whitney is going to point out a few of these areas so you can have a strategy on how to combat these issues as they may arise.
Jeff's done a great job effectively communicating how complex systems affect change and leadership within the healthcare setting, and Stephanie has identified resources that are necessary for change within the healthcare workplace. Now we're going to identify obstacles for change. There are always obstacles to scale when implementing any type of change. The obstacles we've identified to discuss in our presentation today are a lack of response, resistance to ideas, and failure of implementation. Individuals within the team may be resistant to ideas and potential alterations that change accompanies. As humans, we grow accustomed to traditions and consistency with the way things are done. But the old adage is true: just because it's always been done doesn't mean it's always the best option. As a healthcare professional, aren't you agitated when you hear, "Well, that's how it's always been done"? Why does that make it the best option? Anthony Robbins said it best with the quote, "If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten." When this obstacle is standing in front of you, it's important to evaluate your current culture and performance. Identifying critical performance priorities, behavioral strengths, and behavioral weaknesses can give a more defined perspective and allow for modifications to the implementation strategies that you've explored. This can decrease the amount of resistance, specifically if team members feel they have some type of ownership or contribution to the new policies. When implementing new policies, it's always best to have as many team members jump on board. That lowers the amount of resistance that you could potentially face. If there is a lot of resistance, you may also see a lack of response from either employees or patrons of your healthcare facility. When integrating new policies, individuals within the organization may not always see what the benefit or the need for the change could be. If you use the resources of clarifying your values and expected behaviors, that's a strategy to overcome this obstacle. Defining the behaviors outlines objective expectations specifically for those areas of weakness that you've identified. It can give both employees and patrons alike substantial expectations they can become accustomed to. The last obstacle we'll discuss is failure of implementation. This is not usually from the top of the food chain, but rather the worker bees that are in the trenches every day. When a policy is handed down, say from corporate, it's not always completely implemented by the employees just due to a lack of confusion or needing some clarity. Not all members of the organization completely understand the new mission, the new vision, or completely understand why the policy has been in place. A strategy to clear this hurdle would be to clarify those mission and vision statements. This would include clearing up any confusion or redundancy within those statements, reevaluating statements to use language that your employees or your patient population would understand, and clear communication from all employees of the team from the very top to the very bottom to ensure everyone is on the same page. Change is never easy. However, we've given you a few obstacles that you may face, as well as some resources that you can implement to combat those obstacles. Strategies in your toolbox can always make change a little easier. Now that we've discussed the complexity systems of leadership and change in healthcare, resources that are needed for introducing that change, and as well as obstacles that you may face and ways to combat those obstacles, Jeff, Stephanie, and I are each going to discuss with you specific strategies that we have identified that we need to do to enhance our own personal leadership within our own workplaces. We hope that we've given you great background information and useful tools that you can see we've decided to use to make ourselves better leaders within our personal workplaces.
Okay, so in reflecting on some of our readings from the past few weeks on personal leadership, I definitely feel that one way for me to grow is to better understand my strengths. I tend to want to do everything from home life to work life, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but there are probably a lot of things I would be better off just saying no to. I think my strengths lie in teaching, learning, and coaching, but I'm not always sure. So performing a feedback analysis, as Peter Drucker advocates, would help me to gain greater insight into my strengths. Essentially, this entails recording what my expectations are of any decisions that I make and then comparing that to the actual outcomes. This done over the course of a few months will provide much greater insight into my strengths. This is something that can easily be added to my regular journaling activity, which coincidentally is not so regular at the moment. So I would definitely have to pick up that habit as well again. But I feel that this will provide greater awareness of my strengths and will definitely help me to be more intentional with my work choices and ultimately help me to be more successful.
All right, so as a wrap up here for the leadership course, some of the strategic intent that I have moving forward in my role within athletic training is to always have a continual self-review of the leadership effectiveness that I have within the workplace. Am I truly acting as a leader, or am I acting as a manager and just dictating what people are doing? I don't want to do that. I want to have an open mind and allow others to be able to make decisions as well, because they may have a decision that or an idea that may be beneficial to the environment that I haven't necessarily thought of. So always making sure that I have an open mind to that. So the next thing that I have is not getting defeated whenever I am challenged or questioned about personal or professional motive. There have been times in the past where my motive has been questioned as far as why I want to implement the things that I do, and just making sure that I'm not getting defeated. And just being open to where they're coming from and where I'm trying to come from, and having open lines of communication so that everybody can see where we're coming from. Some of the policies that I see that may need some revision or development in my current setting would, of course, be the emergency action plan, taking over at a new location, really making sure that we have an EAP that is effective for this location now, and that everybody's involved in the decision-making process to make sure that EMS, coaches, student athletes, and my athletic training staff all know what we need to be doing within that if an event does occur. And then strategies to apply what we've learned this semester into the profession all goes back to what I've already discussed. Just making sure that I'm really listening to the thoughts and concerns of those that are around me. So once again, the coaches, student athletes, athletic trainers, physicians, everybody, because everybody has an opinion. Whether you think it's valid or not, you still need to listen to that opinion, as something good may actually come out of it. And you may be able to have better treatment for your patients, or a better work environment from those thoughts that they have. And then making sure that we make adjustments as necessary to ensure that a cohesive environment for all involved. So making sure that everybody knows that they have a say and that they're able to make decisions, and that they can come to me or whoever, we can discuss them and collaborate, because ultimately it's about making sure that the patients are getting the best care. So those are some of the things going forward that I have taken away from this course, and I hope to implement and to further strengthen in my future professional career and even in my personal life, making sure that I'm able to communicate effectively with all of those that are around, and trying to make sure that I always know that there's always two sides to every thought, and my opinion may not necessarily be the best. So making sure that we keep that in mind. So that is my strategic intent, and I hope that you guys are all able to take something away from the presentation that we had for you guys today.
Upon self-reflection of how to make myself a better leader, I need to identify my personal strengths, the areas in which I need improvement as a leader. I need to set specific goals and expectations for myself and hold myself accountable with consistent evaluation and modifications. I am always my own worst critic. I can always come up with multiple areas of improvement because I never think that I'm a good enough leader. However, it's more difficult for me to identify strengths and set specific goals and expectations for myself and holding myself accountable for those. Setting goals and expectations, I think, is a vital portion of what can make me a better leader. As an administrator in an athletic training program, it's important for me to effectively lead both my colleagues and my students. If they see me exhibit good, effective leadership skills, I'm hoping that my students as well as my colleagues will implement those same strategies into their own workplace. By giving myself weekly self-evaluations to determine if I am meeting those goals and expectations on a daily basis is an important part of keeping myself accountable. I also think that at least twice a year, I should have feedback from colleagues, from other healthcare professionals that can give me real, vital feedback in order to make myself a better leader with that objective analysis. Every 6 months is not too much to ask, I think, to have somebody really look at how effective I'm being as an administrator and as a leader within the healthcare profession.